very much for your very pertinent observations. I respect your comments. Yes, Dr. J.P. Narayan, I'm sorry that I had to wait for some time. Yes, thank you, thank you.
Honorable Speaker, I think there's a lot of gloom in this room as well as in the country about our parliamentary democracy. So I would like to start off with something positive. In some ways, we haven't done badly at all. I think it's important to remind ourselves of that before we berate ourselves and our democracy and our political institutions. Of course, there's much that's wrong. But if you go by 4 yardsticks that really allow us to claim to be a functioning democracy, I think we have done pretty well. Competitive elections, we certainly have competitive elections, and we have thrown out governments persistently, and you so rightly pointed out in 1977. I don't think anybody really believed it would happen. We all dreamed it would happen. We didn't really believe it would happen. I was a young man at the time, hoping that the tyranny would end, and the way the people responded was magnificent. So competitive elections. Political freedoms, which are so necessary for this competition to be real. With all our distortions, I think there is real political freedom in this country. All of us can say pretty much what we like. I don't think there's real fear of being jailed or mugged or worse in this country. The winners do not punish the losers merely because they happen to be the losers. We have many of our neighboring countries and elsewhere where you may lose your head, not merely freedom, merely because you lost the election. And the elected government is truly in power, not a coterie or a junta. I think these 4 are of inestimable value, and we should recognize those before we look at the problems. So I would like to specifically state these things. Not that we do not know, but I think we have to have a more rounded appreciation of what's happening in democracy. The second broad point I'd like to make is, increasingly, democracy is so delegitimized in this country that many people are tempted to look at illiberal, undemocratic solutions. For instance, there is a belief increasingly that the rise of the unelected, that is better for the country than the elected. I think that's a very dangerous delusion. Many people have written books about the unelected, written books about the constitutional organs. The Honorable former Chief Justice, he had the courage to state that there were some distortions because the Parliament, for a variety of reasons, yielded space. In this case, to the judiciary, he was somewhat delicate, but I think I should be somewhat more indelicate and then state it openly. You have been stating it very repeatedly. Yielded space, and I think it's a perversion of our democracy and constitution to think that the judges can name their own successors. No functioning democracy in the world allows that to happen. It is very clearly, unquestionably a perversion of the constitution. That the lawmakers did not have the courage and the gumption to stand together, even though they believe it passionately, to stand together and correct the distortion is actually a very sad commentary on the way our democracy is functioning, and that must be corrected soon. Otherwise, increasingly, we will fall prey to the temptation to believe that a non-democratic organ of state is always a better organ. The middle class tends to believe that a politician by definition is bad, politics by definition is utterly dangerous and criminal and villainous, and therefore anything non-political is perfectly acceptable. There's nothing more dangerous than that. Having said that, you raised the issue of what happened in Parliament during the confidence vote. And I, along with millions of our countrymen, am deeply grateful to you for invoking the inherent provision by which the House can expel its own members for conduct unbecoming of the members. It was invoked only twice before you did that. I think one case was H.G. Mudgal, before the first Parliament was elected, in fact. The second was when Mrs. Gandhi herself was expelled for a contempt of the House or for misleading the Parliament or Parliamentary Committee. But otherwise, nobody dared to do that. You did that. But I would like to emphatically submit that the roots of the problem are not technical. They are not in the House. What is seen in the House is merely a symptom of the much deeper malaise. Dr. Shashi Tharoor mentioned that. Dr. Bhaskar Rao mentioned that. And the Honorable Member of Parliament, Mr. Ranjita, mentioned that. I think we should go into the core of that issue. There are three big symptoms of this deeper malaise, and I would like this body to look at that very dispassionately. It's not enough to simply say things are bad and express our angst. The first is the divisions. The Secretary General mentioned in his presentation initially, and you mentioned that, the fractured politics and the divisions, the way things are happening in Maharashtra now, the Northeast, the sub-regional passions aroused persistently in many parts of the country, or the way Delhi itself was paralyzed, the national capital was paralyzed in a country as large as 1 billion people because of a Gujjar Meena agitation. It could happen again tomorrow. We only temporarily pushed it under the carpet. It could happen tomorrow again on the caste issue of reservations. You can clearly see political commerce made out of these fractious divisions in society. And it makes abundant short-term political sense for politicians and parties to play up to these tendencies. And there's a systemic problem we cannot ignore. There's no point telling them to be patriotic, to be national, when to be national means to lose the election. So how do we create an environment in which that changes? Question one. Two, I'm grateful to Dr. Bhaskar Rao for raising the important question. Mr. Shyam Benegal, like many well-meaning, intelligent citizens deeply concerned about democratic values in the country, and the Prime Minister himself belongs to this category, is arguing for state funding. Dr. Manmohan Singh repeatedly said that. With due respect, sir, that simply is not the solution at all. The concept is sound. The problem is, as Dr. Bhaskar Rao mentioned, in many states, the expenditure for a state legislative office, in fact, in all this discussion, we're talking about the Parliament. With due respect, Mr. Speaker, the real problem of India is in the states. The Parliament is more of a symbolic value. The governance, the good and the bad, and the politics, the good and the bad, is really in states. And therefore, any discussion to be meaningful has to really encompass the state legislatures and the way democracy is functioning there at the grassroots level. For a state legislative office, let alone a parliament, Lok Sabha office, the typical expenditure in my state of Andhra Pradesh by a major party would be of the order of 5 to 10 crore rupees. I am not exaggerating, Mr. Speaker, a bit, and you know by now very well. Every member of parliament who knows Andhra Pradesh, or Karnataka for that matter, understands that. I was saying it'll be more. I tend to be conservative in these numbers. In the next election in Andhra Pradesh, easily we will see an expenditure of about 15 crore rupees by at least 3 major formations for each assembly constituency in Andhra Pradesh. And that means about 4,000 crores in Andhra Pradesh alone. Most of this expenditure is not for campaigning. The reason why public funding will not work is 80 to 90% expenditure is to buy the vote straightforward with money and liquor. It does not mean that the money will guarantee election. It does not mean high expenditure guarantees election. Sometimes it does not. But it means that non-expenditure guarantees defeat. Huge expenditure has become a necessary condition but not a sufficient condition. So we must not confuse between the non-success of high expenditure for robustness of our democracy. There is a huge entry barrier which prevents ethical politics to enter. The reason why the good people do not enter is the good guys come last. They simply have very little chance of getting elected. There still are a few exceptions like Bengal, like Kerala, like Gujarat in many ways. There are still a few exceptions individually because the stature, the towering stature of an individual, you may get elected. You may still overcome these barriers. But I'm talking about the overwhelming majority of members of parliament or the state legislatures in the country. The exceptions only prove the rule. We must not go by the exceptions. When money transferred to the voters and inducement is the primary determinant of the outcome, any amount of state funding will not solve the problem. And in fact, many members of parliament unfortunately are not sufficiently aware the 2003 law on electoral funding in the country is an exceptionally sound law, except that it simply is observed in the breach. Nobody cares, because if the expenditure is legitimate and fully accounted and accountable, then the law will work. If the expenditure is illegitimate and unaccounted and unaccountable, no law will work. It's as simple as that. And there's an